Ben, why don't you give us just a little brief synopsis about who you are and what your role is in the world of image making?
Yeah, sure. Look, I am a filmmaker. I feel like I have to put that up front because photography has been a passion for a long time for me, but it's never been something that I've done professionally. There was a bit of a fork in the road early in my career, and I thought I might do that, but filmmaking was what kind of swept me away. And the two have crossed over a lot in terms of subject matter. But the work I tend to focus on in filmmaking is documentary or kind of social justice type stories. But I've always tried to maintain photography, and I think it's always helped the other work.
I want to dial back a little bit in your history. What was it that inspired you to get into a visual field like this?
I was thinking about it because you'd mentioned that a few weeks ago that we'd talk about it, and I think it was really growing up in a creative house. I mean, the photography really came about because I think my father loves photography. The house was full of books, photography books. You know, they've only become more valuable in looking through them later on now in life. You know, they're such a beautiful piece, and they're made less and less these days, but the work that went into them was incredible. And that was really my entry point into photography and seeing those images. And there's a couple of photographs that were hanging on the wall. There was a lot displayed in the house as well when I was growing up. And, you know, as a younger person, you know, I'm talking like under 10, to see these images and not quite understand them, but them to occupy your dreams and your thoughts later on in the day, that's where the fascination started. You know, I can still remember all of those works in my mind, the ones particularly that are on the wall or in the books. And I didn't know what to make of them, but they would just kind of haunt or mesmerize me as I would daydream at school. And I wanted to understand how they were made. I wanted to understand what went into them. And then I discovered a photographer like Cartier-Bresson who just blew my mind. And it was the storytelling in his work that I loved. And that kind of set me on a whole path. And so it was that was really the haunting of those images was really what set me off. And then at school, you know, I started getting my hands on cameras and stuff like that as well.
You talked about at school getting access to cameras. These were obviously film days. I shouldn't say obviously, sorry, you know that
No, they were.
Like me, your earliest access to cameras was in a dark room, or you know, and processing your own images. I imagine that whole shebang.
Very much, yeah. It was film and dark rooms and chemicals and all of that stuff. What a great grounding! But I mean, it was all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I should say I've never worked professionally as a photographer, but I've had exhibitions and self-published my book of my work and things like that. So it was this sideline passion, you know, that I never thought maybe I could do professionally, but I wanted to pursue it.
Did you study filmmaking or photography formally? Yeah,
look, I had kind of was going along in this idea of becoming a filmmaker. And at that time, working in the film industry, and you wanted to get into the camera department, as I did, because photography was the thing that I was able to do before I got into filmmaking, because I could get access to a camera, I could tell a story with an image, and that was a very natural way for me to step into filmmaking, into the camera department. I started off straight out of school working in a camera rental house where they would rent 35mm film cameras. And I would clean the cameras as they'd come in off films and commercials and music clips and things like that. You know, we'd take them apart and then put them back on the shelf for the next project. And the people that would come in were camera assistants, focus pullers, they were kind of used to be called. And they would test the gear and then go off to the production and then come back with all the gears all dirty, and I'd clean it again and send it out. So that was my kind of apprenticeship. Beyond that, I actually went and I became a clapper loader. Again, the job doesn't exist anymore. That? So clapper loader is the kid on the set who claps the board with all the, you know, take scene one, take two.
Yeah. Yep.
And the loading part of it is you would load the film into the camera. And so you would get 400 or 1,000-foot rolls of 35mm or 16mm. And you'd put your hands in the bag, the black bag, and you'd load it into the magazine. And then you'd hand it to the camera assistant. He'd clip it on and you'd set the gear up with them. Occasionally, you know, you might be able to get a little bit more responsibility. But you're basically responsible for all the film on set. And then you would take that to the lab, which doesn't exist anymore. Often you would have, you know, tens of kilos of film that you would take to the lab, and then they'd process that. And
that's a hefty responsibility, isn't it?
I thought it was. There was one moment where I opened a raw can of 400 feet of 35mm. And, you know, at the time it was $400 a roll. Well, it was probably half that, but once you process it, it's $400 a roll. $1 a minute. So, and, you know, I was 17 and, you know, that's kind of, there was a natural progression through the hierarchy. There was a system that then you moved on to become a camera assistant and a camera operator and eventually a cinematographer, which is what I was kind of thinking I was going to do at that early stage. But I kind of broke away and I did study. I went to New York for 3 months and I studied the NYU kind of summer school there. And that was a real boot camp for filmmakers, that you made 4 films over the summer with a whole group of other people from around the world. And they would give you the 16 mil cameras, black and white reversal film, which is totally unforgiving. And you just go into the streets of New York and film films. And that was,
wow.
You know, I was 22 and at that point I said I want to be a director. And I'd had this kind of 4 years of thinking I was going to be a cinematographer. But that was the progression. It really came out of just wanting to get my hands on a camera, tell a story, working with a group, and or the moving image became the thing that I was obsessed with.
That sounds like amazing 3 months. That's great. Yeah. What was that experience like? Even just New York, like just did you come back changed from that?
Yeah,
totally changed. And you know what's interesting is I came back changed, but you know people from around the world come in and do it, so they're all there in the same mindset. They're all kind of renting places, staying with friends, and you know it's summer, and so it's everything. Manhattan, if anyone's been there, is everything you expect it to be because it looks like it is in the movies, and there's steam coming out of the street and all of that. So you think you're on a set, but it's that intensity of belief and confidence that I really soaked up. The visual impact of New York, and then wanting to tell the stories. And, you know, I saw films that people made there that I have never seen anything like in my life because you're all in your early 20s, you're wanting to experiment and you're absorbing and reflecting New York. And what we do is we make a film a week and then we'd screen all our films at the end of the week in the class and we'd all talk about and criticize and laugh. And it was that energy. So coming back, I just felt a real confidence. I had 4 short films basically that became my portfolio that I would just show around town in Sydney and trying to get TV commercials really at that point. But it was also, I had left thinking I'm a camera assistant and I kind of came home thinking, no, I'm going to be a director. And it was really putting that shingle out on the door and saying, this is what I want to be. And it was kind of trying to make that work then. That was the plan. And I remember talking to my teacher about it before I came back to Sydney and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I want to do TV commercials. I think I can make a living doing that, you know, and they were probably more lucrative then, but there was a path I could see. I had a little body of work. I'd made also a short film in Sydney before I'd left. And it was those kind of 3 or 4 pieces of work that I really came home and just started going around to advertising agencies and showing them. And I'll say one more thing about that experience is that it did change me. It gave me a confidence. It gave me a portfolio, but people look at you differently. I think there is still a degree that going overseas is a healthy thing, but Australians tend to see it as a legitimizing process. You know, I don't necessarily think we have the confidence, or there is something seen about North America or Europe that having worked there makes you seem better in a way. It's that cultural cringe. And I certainly experienced that because all of my work was the streets of Manhattan, you know?
Yeah.
You're a photographer and you go into a project over in London and then come back and they go, oh, wow, you've worked in London. I don't know why it works, but it does help. And I wish it wasn't that way. And I think the confidence thing is changing, but it still has an effect.
It's a thing,
going out and coming home and, you know, with the treasure.
Was that the first time you'd left the country?
No, I had gone over there when I was 20 and I bought a car with a friend and we drove the West Coast. So that was that was always my plan. I dreamed about America growing up. It was really kind of one of those places that I'd watch films.
Did you take any photos on that first road trip?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. It was all, you know, it's the ongoing project of street photography that I love. That's really the only way I had to record it was through photographs. Didn't have a video camera. We'd buy a couple of disposables, but I did take my trusty camera along, and it was all black and white.
What was your trusty camera back then?
Well, I would just use an automatic camera. Prior to that, I had a tank of a Pentax that was all metal, and you know I'd put a fixed lens on it, and I'd practice pulling it out and trying to set the exposure and focus really quickly, just when I wasn't taking photographs, so I could be quick. And then I thought, why don't I just get an automatic camera? And I got a little mini Lux, a little Leica that was, you know, steel body, had a 35 to 70 on it, but it was quick. It had really quick focus. And that's what I wanted then. I was doing street photography, and I'd still use to agree quick focus is really important for me, is to capture those moments and
move on.
And is reliable and built tough and all of those things.